Hey guys, it's Leanna and I'm here today to talk about The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. So I just don't get it. This is gonna be a lengthy video wherein I explain why I really seriously do not understand why everyone loves this book so much. And I've really been thorough here. I never prepare for videos, at all. The most I'll do is write down the questions for a tag video. But I have actually laid out a list where I've broken it down by category, where I will be explaining where I feel it's missed the mark. But before I do that, I just want to be clear that I went into this book expecting and hoping to love it because it gets a lot of praise, an obscene amount of praise, and that's why I'm so confused. If this book didn't get this much praise, I probably wouldn't be filming this video, because if it got a pretty mediocre aggregate rating overall, I'd be like, all right, yeah, that sounds about right. But this is universally loved and respected and recommended. So I am so confused, so confused. I have been ranting about this to anyone that will listen to me the entire time I was reading it. So here you guys get to hear the condensed version of that, because it was just a lot of spewing. Now I've tried to organize it for you. But yeah, so I went into it expecting to love it. And if not love it, at least to see what everyone has loved about it, even if it wasn't personally my taste, to at least see what is so quality about it, if that makes sense. I feel with classic literature, even if I don't personally enjoy the experience of reading it that much, I see what it is that makes it a classic, you know what I mean? So I expected, at the very least, to read Way of Kings and at least feel that way. That even if I enjoy possibly less quality things more, that I get why this is top of the list quality-wise. No, I do not understand. I do not. Any other disclaimers I need to do? I don't think so. So if I think of any, well, okay, this is gonna be super spoilery, so that's not a disclaimer, that's just a warning. So if I kind of figure if you're watching this video, either you've read Way of Kings, in which case you know what I'm talking about, whether or not you liked Way of Kings, you can't be spoiled, or you're here to have me talk you out of reading Way of Kings, in which case you can be spoiled as well, because you will never read it. If you have any interest in reading Way of Kings, and you don't want to be spoiled for anything, then for you, I say, everyone loves this book, I don't. So if you read it and find that you like me do not get it, then come back and watch this video, because maybe we can talk. Or you can go watch every single other video there is about this book and commiserate with those people about why it's so great, because that's most people, it seems like. I'm just over here being like, what? What? So, for serious, I'm telling you, I've been thorough. I have a list of sort of categories and notes for myself so I don't forget to mention the most absurd things that fit into those categories. And then I have just a list on the next page of things that I thought were stupid. So they didn't fit in a category per se, but I didn't want to forget to mention them because they were dumb and I want to talk about them. It's going to be kind of a long video, I'm guessing. Can't know that for sure, but in true Sanderson fashion, who has promised a 10-book, 1,000 pages each series without that really being justified. I feel like I'm more justified in saying this is going to be a long video. I can predict that already, because I have a lot to say, unlike Sanderson. Ooh, okay, getting into the tea already. So, again, I can't stress enough that I did not set out to hate this book. In fact, for a huge chunk of it in the beginning, I kept really trying to like it. I kept being like, well, it's getting there, or at some point it'll click for me. Are these issues? Maybe not. Benefit of the doubt. It must be great, therefore it can't be as dumb as it seems to me right now. So at some point I'll see why this is so brilliant, and then it just got worse and worse and worse. So I landed at 1 star for this book, and I stand by that 1 star. However, if this book was not so well praised, and if it was not so lauded, then I would not have held it to such a high standard, and I might have given it a 2 or a 3. If it was just some random fantasy book that I picked up that I'd never heard of, didn't get a lot of good reviews, and I was just like, I'll read it, and I was like, oh, that was pretty weak. We're gonna give that a 2 or a 3. But because everyone says this is just the fucking shit, then I was like, all right, show me how it's done. And it was awful, so I gave it a 1. I feel like I need to balance out all the 5s out there because it has like a 4.8 on Goodreads, and I don't understand that. I really don't. Like, I'm not trying to be mean. I don't get it. This isn't, okay. I need to just go through my categories. I also, I swear I did not know that I was gonna have this many disclaimers or pre-video things to say. But one last thing. Most of my criticisms, I feel, are like objective structural criticisms. There are some things in it that were a matter of taste, and I will totally be the first to say, like, that's a me thing. That's not necessarily an everyone thing. That I personally found this annoying, or I did not like it, or I don't care for it. But most of my criticisms are things that I think are objectively bad things in terms of writing craft and world building. So again, I don't get it. This isn't just me reading this book and being like, man, that wasn't my taste. I just think it's objectively bad, which is why I'm so confused. All right, okay, let's do this. So you know what you're in for. The categories that I have are pacing, world building, tone, and characters, and then, as previously mentioned, a list of nonsense that just needs to be discussed as well. So I've kind of done it in this order because I feel like that will also allow me to explain for those who aren't aware of the setup of the plot and the world, so that by the time we get into the more specifics of characters, you kind of have a sense of how that fits into things. So what I'm saying is the pacing of my video makes more sense than the pacing of this book. Oh man, we're getting into the tea! Alright, so pacing is the first category. The pacing of this book is, I want to say terrible, but I think a better word might be non-existent. There is no rhyme or reason, no logic, no, like, writing craft perspective reason for it to be this long, this slow, and organized in this way. This is one of the biggest things that I find so confusing, just baffling, is that this book is 1,000 pages. It's over 1,000 pages. How many pages is it really? If we don't count the, like, appendix that explains the world and whatever, this is 1,001 pages. So, to me, when I pick up a book that's 1,001 pages, I don't assume that it's gonna be boring and filler. I assume that the writer has enough of a story, enough content, enough things to be telling me about that it all warrants being in there, and it requires 1,000 pages to tell. So I expect it to have a lot in it, as opposed to being a 200-page story where we did not cut out a single thing that the author ever thought might be a thing in this world, which is how this feels. This feels like every single thing that Sanderson came up with that might be backstory for somebody, or that might be a thing that happened, that could easily be like an offshoot novella add-on for people who really give a shit. It's all just in there. Because if you've decided before you've written it that it's gonna be 1,000 pages, then you're like, well, I don't need to cut anything then. I don't need to weed out what is necessary and what is just filler. I'll just leave it all in there because it's 1,000 pages. So I have the room to do it. I don't have to cut it. But that is not how that works. You don't just get to leave filler in if it's a 1,000-page book. A 1,000-page book means you have 1,000 pages worth of content. And this story could have been told in 200 pages, 250. That's how much plot and that's how many essentials there are actually in here. And to tell that over 1,000 pages, it's just too long, for one, just too long. And because it's so long, there's sort of like this chicken or the egg problem. Because it's so long, then when you get told important things, there's so much space in between when you're told the important thing and when the important thing becomes relevant that you have to keep being told it over and over again, or at least Sanderson feels that you do, because he doesn't trust you as a reader to remember it, except for when he does, and let me get to that in a second. So he repeats himself so much so that you don't forget about this important thing. And honestly, if you cut out all of the repetition, it would be shorter. And the repetition is in there because it's so long. Do you see what I mean by chicken or the egg problem here? Like, it's he had to repeat himself because it's so long, but it's so long because he keeps repeating himself. So just don't, maybe? I don't know. That's my advice. But again, so he does that where he's constantly repeating himself, either about like a line or an important moment or a character or just like a tidbit where you get told it over and over and over again. You're like, yeah, I get it. But this book also has random throwaway chapters about people that are not connected to the main plot of this first book, that are not connected to the main characters of this first book. There's just an interlude where you get told something about them, like a day in the life, and it's just thrown in the middle with no context for why it's there or for why it may become important in a later book, and it's never revisited in this book. So you trust me to remember this random throwaway chapter about some character that I have no idea why I'm being told about them. I'm just gonna remember that for like the next 1,000-page book. But all the little things you tell me over and over and over again. Like, why? Why? I don't understand why you would do that. Like, the only comparison I can make between, like, that I came up with when I was ranting about this, I was like, this is like, if you've seen Lord of the Rings, at the end of Return of the King, there's like this gatekeeper of Mordor that comes out and has like a little tete-a-tete with Aragorn. So the Way of Kings is like, if in the beginning of Fellowship, when Frodo is leaving the Shire, we have a brief interlude where we get a day in the life of Mordor's gatekeeper. Don't know who they are or why we're seeing it. We just get told about them for a quick sec, and then back to Frodo leaving the Shire. And if someone complained about it, they'd be like, oh, but don't worry, there's payoff, because in Return of the King, you're going to see that character again. And you're like, but why did I get told about it while Frodo was in the Shire? Why didn't you just tell me about it when we got there? I've dismissed it as being unimportant at this point because you didn't do anything with it when you told me about it. And I had no context for it. You didn't bring it in any way where I could be like, let me file it away under it is relevant to this part of the world or the story. It's just, why is this here? Why is this here? I think Sanderson has confused like epic world building with just baffling the reader. That's not how that works. You don't just like throw things at them so that they're like, this world is just so big and immense that I'm so confused, therefore it must be impressive. That's not how that works. You do have to have a story that kind of makes sense, where people kind of know where it's going, or at least where it may or may not be relevant, or why the fuck they're being told it in any way, like a hint about why you're being told this thing, how it fits into the bigger picture here. No hint, nothing. Just why is this here? And then part of pacing is also the fact that there's so much here that is backstory that does not need to be told like in the narrative. There's so much backstory, so much lead up to events that could just be told as a few expository lines, a few moments of explanation and dialogue, maybe, if you want to throw in a brief flashback to illustrate a really significant moment, maybe. But no, we get pages and pages and pages of backstory that we did not need. I promise you we did not need it. There's just no reason for it. I mean, so one of our main characters, Caledon, he is, for most of the book, he's a slave in a bridge crew in a war camp, and the bridge crews are basically cannon fodder, and he's really downtrodden about this, as you would be, because that sucks. But if the book opened where we meet Caledon already, like page 1, he's in this slave crew, and then we slowly find out how he got to be there, who he was before, why he's different from everyone else, and found that out through tidbits here, interesting conversation there, maybe a brief moment of reflection that he has, and you as the reader finally slowly piece together who this guy is and what led him to be here, that would keep me interested and engaged, because I'd be like, oh man, who is this guy? That is not how this book is set up. We open the book where there's these like very mysterious, enigmatic, magical people who are discussing some epic decision and event. And you're like, okay, these our main characters? Okay, their names interesting, following along, I think. And you're like, okay. And then you get to the next chapter and you're like, oh no, we're skipping ahead 1,000 years. Okay, so those were not our main characters. What's happening? So credit where credit's due. Then we have this really engrossing and exciting action sequence where this reluctant assassin is just so amazingly assassinating a king. It's really compelling to read. The magic seemed really cool and interesting, and it is well told. As an opening scene in a movie, that would get me to watch. It's like this opening chase sequence, and it was interesting. And I was like, okay, so this is our main character, this like interesting, magical, reluctant assassin. I want to know why he's doing this, why he was asked to do this. This is interesting. He's our main character. No, he is not our main character. Then we skip 5 years ahead, and now we're going to meet our main characters, who are Caledon, the guy who, he's not a slave yet. no, we're gonna get there. Then we also have Shalon, who's, we'll discuss her in the character section, many issues with her, but she's like a young girl who's got a plan to save her family and is gonna be studying stuff. It's the best way I can explain her. And we have Dalinar, who we don't meet until way later. I think it's only in part 2 that you meet him. And he's one of our main characters, and he's like one of the leaders in the war camp that Caledon is a part of. So the whole opening, you're kind of being thrown into these character situations that you're like, is this who I'm following? No. Okay. Is this who I'm nope, not them either. So then when you are introduced to the main characters, you're like, is this going to be that again? Where this is going to be told to me and then never told to me again? Do I need to pay attention to this? At that point, I'm already like twice burned. So I'm like, do I need to pay attention to this? Because don't want to just skip ahead another 1,000 years. No, we do follow them. And once again, Caledon, we get shown him through someone else's eyes, who is not our main character, some kid, while Caledon is still like in the war camp. He's not a slave. He's like a leader of a crew, whatever. He's like in charge of men in fighting. And we get this young guy who's just joined up with Caledon's group and is like, wow, like he's such an amazing leader, and like I'm so excited to be in his group because everyone says he's so amazing and he's just the best ever and I'm so lucky. And then we never see that kid again. Who we follow then is Caledon, and Caledon then gets made a slave, and there is this gap in between those two events, so you don't exactly know how he went from being in charge of people to being a slave. So it's like Sanderson was like, oh yeah, I should throw in a little bit of enigma about that. But by then it's too late. By then you have a general sense of kind of where he was before, so the fact that he's downtrodden, the fact that he was a leader of men before, you already know this. So presumably somebody somewhere betrayed him or something went south, but it's not that mysterious anymore. You're just like, I kind of wonder how he ended up here, but it's not that big a leap to guess at what might have happened. And the whole thing with Caledon is just so long. So long. Him being a slave, all the scenes of him being so sad about it, and him finally finding the will to like have purpose in life again, and then trying to like get his men to like also see it that way and not be giving up on life, and all of that, it takes forever. And it's boring. It did not need to take that long. It didn't. You could boil that down to some essential scenes to establish how downtrodden he is, to establish that he's kind of getting back into it, and to establish that, okay, now he is pulling it together, and some choice moments with his crew to build that up. You do not need this kind of page count to establish that. I'm sorry, you do not. Many stories do it to great effect in much fewer pages. And in addition to that taking forever, we also get pages and pages and pages of backstory of his childhood and how he was studying to be a surgeon because that's what his dad was. And like, it's important to know that he has some medical background because he is able to help his men because he has this medical background. He's able to, bind up their wounds and kind of know about healing salves and stuff. But I didn't need chapter after chapter after chapter of backstory telling me about him learning this stuff. All I needed was a couple of throwaway lines where we get told that he was studying medicine before he went into the army. And maybe a very, very, very brief flashback of like the first time that he maybe helped somebody. That's also unnecessary, but if you want to have a flashback, okay, maybe have one. But I didn't need pages and pages and pages of him being a youngin', learning about medicine. Why? Why? It did not need to be there. For Sanderson to write that himself, so he has a sense of where this character has been as like a thought exercise, and maybe release it as like an ebook novella for those who give a shit, go ahead. But it does not need to be in the main book. It does not add to the story. I did not learn anything essential, and I was bored. It did not move the plot forward. It does not need to be there. And then we also have these other characters that by the time we get around to their stories again, because it's not like there's so much happening. In the Song of Ice and Fire books, there are so many characters with so many plot lines that to jump around from each to each to each to follow them all, it takes forever to get back to the first one. Here, you really don't have that many plot lines going on. They're just each taking so long to get anywhere that you have that same problem if it takes so long to get back to a plot line, but not because there's so much going on, because it's just taking forever to tell you about it. And that's terrible pacing. It's terrible. That doesn't make it epic. That makes it long and boring and drawn out, and it needs an editor. Like, to have written all of those 1,000 pages so that you as a writer get to know your own world, so you get to know your own characters, you like write it all down, everything you've thought of, go for it. Absolutely. And once you've done it, then you realize, okay, maybe I don't need all this lead into it. What if I start later where it's already happened and then kind of hint at it? That might be more interesting. Cut out 200 pages. Maybe I don't need to have all these scenes where they're having all these conversations. What are the essentials? What does my audience need to know? I'll keep those. Maybe keep in the back of my mind the other ones. Might reference them as having happened, but we don't need to see them. And cut it down. Boil it down to what is essential, to what your readers really do need to see and hear about and what they'll be interested in. Because this is just filler. It does not need to be there. I promise you it doesn't. Generally the pacing was just bad, the order in which things are told to you. There's no mystery to it and it takes too long is really the most concise way I can say that that's what's wrong with the pacing. Too long, too much information, not enough information about those stupid random interludes. Like, just don't put them in there. This is not where this is happening in the story, and it is irrelevant to me right now. I don't need to hear about it, and I'm not going to remember it for when I do. And presumably, given how repetitive you are, when we do get to that point, you're going to be reminding the shit out of me about what this means, so just tell me about it then. Don't tell me about it now, just so that we make it to 1,000 pages. Why? Okay, so that brings me now to the next category, which is world building. So this is where Brandon Sanderson is supposedly the master. Like, all I hear is what a great world builder he is. And having read Mistborn, I did think Mistborn had some pretty good world building. If you saw my previous video about my take on the Mistborn trilogy, I even said my issue with it is not the world building. Like, I did not like where it went and what he did with it and how it ended. But that was aside from the world building. I thought he did a good job building a magic system, building a society, and explaining it. So in Mistborn, I was like, okay, like, everyone was telling me that his truly amazing world building is in the Stormlight Archive. And I was like, well, the one thing that I did think was quality in Mistborn was the world building. So, if apparently where his world building truly shines is in Stormlight Archive, well, let's do it. I want to hear about it. I would love to see the master world builder at his best. This world building is terrible. It's honestly terrible for many, many reasons. One being that it's internally inconsistent, like the rules do not make sense if you take them to their natural conclusion. It's so, like, dispersed and expansive that you don't ever actually get a sense for anything, because everything is just so all over the place. Not just because of the interludes, which also are all over the place, but there's no cohesive sense of how this world kind of works together and how it all feels and looks. You get a ton of detail, encyclopedic levels of detail, about, like, very minute specific things, like what's a contraption someone is using, a convention for how something is done, a ritual, a practice, a hierarchy, very specific things, but like really an overall sense of just like how this works and how it functions and how it looks. I'm not picturing it. I'm sorry, I am not. So it doesn't feel cohesive. And again, it doesn't make sense. And a lot of it seems arbitrary, which is, I feel like, the death knell for world building, because it doesn't matter how insane and wacky and out there the idea is, it just has to fit into your world and make sense for it to be there. Like, you can have a taco truck in the middle of your medieval fantasy world if, like, you explain it and it makes sense and there's a reason for it to be there. It can be in there. You just need to have a reason for it. There's a lot of things in there that are so out there and they're not explained aside from the actual nuts and bolts of how it works. It's not explained in the context of the world, like why this would be here. So it's like explaining the mechanics of the taco truck, like how the, grill on it works, how the wheels work, where it parks, how it drives, but never explaining why the fuck is there a taco truck here? A lot of the things in this world felt that way. He would go into great detail explaining this thing, but not why it's there, not why it would make sense for this culture to have this thing, not why this world would need this thing. It's just in there, and let me tell you all about how it works because I think I'm so clever in having come up with this random ass thing. Why? It doesn't make sense. Why is this here? So specific examples of that, I have so many. This is gonna be a long ass video. Okay. The main one that just really irked me, because in addition to not making sense, it also created, I think, inconsistencies in the plot, and these are spren. Spren, for those of you who are wondering, are like, I'm not sure if I'm just picturing it this way or if this is how he described it, but they're like little kind of like balls of light, kind of like, not pixies because they're kind of non-corporeal, but like these little light fairy magic dust things that pop up depending on Most of it seems to be related to emotions, but also then natural occurrences. And that's another thing where I'm not super clear on. If there's so many spren for so many different things, what doesn't have spren and why not? Like, I don't know where at first, when I was thinking about it, it's like, they're all emotions. I was like, wait, no, they're not all emotions. Sometimes they're tied to things like wind and fire and rot and things like that. Those are not emotions. So I don't know where the line is. What doesn't have spren? But so, literally, the way they work is if you're feeling angry, then anger spren begin to like pop up and congregate around you. If you're being creative, then like creativity spren pop up around you because they're drawn to it. And like visually, you're like, I guess that's kind of cool. But also, and this is never brought into the plot. If this was made to be like a thing that the characters actually have to like deal with as an issue, as a problem, I'd be kind of okay with it. It's still kind of dumb, but it'd be like, okay, this is something tricky that they have to deal with. It's not. And what I mean by that is if there are spren popping up, there are anger spren, there are glory spren, there are anticipation spren, that's a word on paper. There's no possibility for stealth at that point. But in the plot, the only time spren are brought up is to sort of drive home the emotions of a situation. So in case you missed the 10 billion times that he explicitly told you that this character is angry or upset about something because both the narration told you and the character explicitly out loud said that they're angry about something, so much subtlety. Anger spren pop up around them. And you're like, oh damn, they're really angry. My mind automatically thinks, what about there's all kinds of politicking. So presumably there are characters that hate each other, but that they're going to be smiling and pretending to like each other because it's better for politics or because they're trying to trick somebody into allying with them and that kind of thing. But presumably these spren would give you away instantly because hate spren would pop up as soon as you're talking to somebody that you secretly hate. And then here come the awkward spren because you were given away. Same thing for romantic situations. Like, you wouldn't be able to go up to somebody that you have a crush on, but you don't want to tell them that because here come the love spren. Like, they're only brought up to reinforce a point. They're never an issue. It's never something where the characters are worried about being given away, which they would be, and they should be. If that's how spren work, they just pop up around you unexpectedly because you're feeling a thing. That would be distracting and really in the way for trying to get anything done. So I don't understand why they're there, and they just make no sense. And it's anytime you're reading a scene and all of a sudden you're told that anticipation spren popped up, I am out of the story. That's absurd. What are you doing? The next example of poor world building, in my opinion, is the random conventions and the random divides between men and women in this world, which he could have done all the things that he did if he had either explicitly made it satire and said, and it was trying to point out the pointlessness of some of these kinds of things, or if he actually explained it, like why this would be a thing in the world. And neither happens. They're just in there, the mechanics of them are explained to you, but never the why. Never a context for why the fuck this is a thing in this world. So, hand burqas. I do not understand the hand burqa. There are women in this society, the way that modesty works is that the whole hand, one of your hands is covered all the way to your fingertips. Like the sleeve is sewn shut, and that is your safe hand. And the other hand is allowed to be visible, and it's the free hand. Now, when I first read that, I was like, wow, that's weird and arbitrary. And I was like, okay, well, I'm guessing he's going to be making a point about how arbitrary modesty conventions are. And at one point, there is like a throwaway line about how, you know, modesty conventions, people are really uptight about them, whatever they happen to be. And I was like, yeah, that's true. But people usually do have a reason for it. Even if it's a reason that you think is silly, there is a reason for it. You know, it's to do with some religious text that calls for it, or it's to do with some symbolic tradition. Like, there is a reason. They don't just up and decide all women have to cover one hand. Just 'cause. That's how it's gonna be. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't. So, but that's how it works in this world. We constantly get reminded that women only have one hand available to them to use because their safe hand has to be covered, and how shocking it is if it's not. And why? It's never explained. It's never like, because their gods believed that this one hand commits evil. It wasn't that some historical figure once committed a great crime with that hand or something. There's nothing like that. They're just constantly being told that women do everything one-handed because they can't use the other hand. Why? Why is this a thing? It's absurd. So either turn it into satire or explain it. But just throwing it out there and being like, that's how the world works, it's extremely frustrating. And part two of why that's frustrating is because women are the only ones that read and write. There are a couple exceptions to this, but overall, men do not read and write, women read and write. It's considered a girly, feminine thing to do, reading and writing. Which, on the one hand, I'm like, okay, that's an interesting twist. Usually it's the other way around, where women are prevented from being literate because women are, power is denied them. And so, on the one hand, women are kept from being able to physically do things because one hand is constantly covered, but they're handed the massive amount of power that comes with reading and writing. And we get treated to many explanations of how skilled they are at one-handedly handling an inkwell and a quill and whatever the fuck else they're using to write, because don't forget, they are one-handed all the time because that's how this world works. But why? I feel like if the society did this for after 1 month, the dudes would be like, it's super inconvenient that I cannot read and write. So because men get things read to them. If a man wants to read a book, it's really super girly to read it yourself, but they have women read books to them. I'm sorry, but you wouldn't hand that much power to a woman if this isn't an equal society. Unless women are in charge and they're the ones decreeing this, which they're not, it's made clear they're not because men are still the ones holding positions of power, not women. They wouldn't do this because, again, and this is where it's internally inconsistent, men are the ones that are waging war. That's the manly thing to do. Which you'd be like, oh, well, you just need to hold a sword for that, and that's it. No, that's what the soldiers, the boots on the ground, need to do. But the men who are at the top, who are planning battle strategies, who are reviewing maps, who are sending messages to their allies about what their strategy is going to be, they would need to write. They would need to read. I'm sorry, you're reading a map and you're not reading? How are you planning anything? You're not making notes about where your army is positioned and located? I'm sorry, but I think after 1 month of not being able to read and write, you'd be like, damn, I really need to read and write, because that would make this whole waging war thing a lot easier. And it's never explained why this would be the divide. It's just that, that's girly and that men don't do it. If there was some really, really strong belief that it's like that their God has told them that men should not read and write, and so they'd be like, this is so impractical, but there's no way around it because it would be a sin for me to read, then I'd be like, at least, even though this is super impractical for you, I get that there's this other reason for you that overrides that. The inconvenience is worth it to you because of the significance of this practice. But it's not explained, it's just that's a convention. Because men do read and write when they join churches and stuff, so they can read scriptures. So it's just a societal convention that makes zero sense. I'm sorry, it makes zero sense. So for a great world builder, this is dumb. You didn't give me any reasons for it, so it's just dumb. And again, another difference between men and women. Women eat sweet food only, and men eat savory food only. This is once again not explained, it's just how things are done. Because girls do everything one-handed, read and write and eat sugar, and dudes wage war, are illiterate, and eat salt. Why? There's no reason for this. It's not explained, and it's not a satire. It's just dumb. I'm sorry, but it's dumb. Oh, and even more, so reading a map would be important when you're waging war, but, Caledon, our long-suffering hero, who I may or may not have mentioned, who we see copious amounts of backstory for when he's studying medicine, let me repeat that, studying medicine without reading and writing? I don't think so. That's just dumb. If you're going to write a story where men do not read and write, then you do not also write a story where men are studying something that requires that much in-depth knowledge. He would need to read and write if he was studying medicine. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. So you cannot have your cake and eat it too. Unless I guess if you're a woman you can, because you only eat cake, because you only eat sweet foods. Which, just diabetes, yikes. So those are some of my notes on world building. There are many, many things that I thought were weak, inconsistent, and illogical, but those were the standouts. Those were the highlights of things that constantly aggravated me, that made no sense. So my next section is tone. The tone of this book is confusing. For, again, these things that I mentioned that would work for me if they were satirical, someone told me that, well, maybe he's just being subtle. It is satire, but he's not coming out and saying it. Well, I find that hard to believe, because everything that he wants you to know in this story is never, ever subtle. There's no subtlety whatsoever. Everything is explicitly told to you all the time. Be it world building things or the way characters are feeling, what they're thinking, what their motivations are. And it's just so on the nose all the time. God forbid a reader ever have to infer something. You're told it all the time. Multiple times, in fact. So in case you missed it the first time, you'll catch it on the next 9. And so a lot of things in it, they seemed absurd to me, but I was reading it going, am I meant to be taking this seriously? So I mentioned the spren. Well, one of the spren, which you kind of find out later isn't a spren, or is a spren, but is not your usual spren. She's like this little ball of light, and she starts following Caledon around when he's a slave. And he's like, well, it's just a wind spren or whatever. So I just, but she's real talkative, and more so than they usually are, and seems to slowly becoming more and more aware of like her own consciousness more than a spren normally would. So she follows him around and talks to him all the time like a little pixie. And that's already like the imagery of that is a little childish, but fine. But the way she's written, I'm supposed to be reading this as she's slowly coming into being aware, being self-aware. Except she's written just like a petulant child that's playing silly jokes. And it reads like these are meant to be like cute haha moments where you're like, oh, that's adorable that he's like joking around with a little fairy. But when he's in the middle of a war camp and he's this enslaved cannon fodder bridge crew, where I'm constantly being told about this in excruciating amounts of detail so that I'll just feel how downtrodden he really is and just how bad his situation is. But we also have Tinkerbell flying around just being all cute. It takes me out of the story, and I don't know what the tone here is meant to be. It's not a brief, like, Shakespeare and Joe Abercrombie and J. Kristoff are very good at throwing in moments of humor in dark books, dark situations. But the kind of humor it is still has to be consistent with the tone of the scene, with the tone of the type of characters that you have and the situation that they're in. If there were moments of humor, for considering how bad we're supposed to be understanding Caledon's situation to be, the humor would need to be gallows humor. It cannot be PBS Kids Disney Tinkerbell flying around. Like, are we in 6th grade? I am not taking seriously the gravity of Caledon's situation when fucking Tinkerbell is flying around his head just doing nonsense. I don't believe it, and it's annoying. Part of that tone discrepancy is also later, I think I'll mention it in my, like, miscellaneous, just dumb things, because it's so dumb. But the kind of banter that there is between this bridge crew is like a 6th grade level. And here, again, I'm not requiring adult content in an adult book so that I'll take it seriously. I want to be clear that I'm not saying that you need to have coarse language or you need to have sex or you need to have anything like that for me to take your book seriously. I do need to have those things in there if the scene that you're painting has individuals that believably would use coarse language or would be engaging in sexual encounters. It's like you wrote about a brothel and then no one is having sex. Like, I don't need you to write about sex in your book, but if you wrote about a brothel, I'm gonna find it very unbelievable if there's no sex in the brothel. So for this rough around the edges, super downtrodden, just absolutely rough crew who are, like, living the worst of life, for their level of humor and banter to be, like, 6th grade, like Sesame Street level humor, that takes me out of the story, and I don't believe it. I'm sorry, I don't believe it. It makes it extremely childish. I think the example that I used when I was complaining about this to someone is that it's like if you're watching Sons of Anarchy, but the Sons of Anarchy, their, like, banter and dialogue was, like, pulled out of VeggieTales. I mean, you don't have to write about coarse language, but if you're gonna write a biker gang, then they need to be using coarse language. If you want to write about the VeggieTales, then write about the VeggieTales. Because those two things don't go together. And I'm not going to believe that this is a hardcore biker gang if you're going to make them sound like 6th graders. Which is how this comes across to me. And it's very, very annoying. And then part of the tone as well, I did complain in my Mistborn video about the fact that everything sort of boiled down to religion. And I was told that, well, okay, that's true in Mistborn, but The Way of Kings is not like that. I would argue that it most certainly is. He is extremely preachy, and the message that he's sending the whole time is extremely heavy-handed again, and so repetitive, because everything he does, everything he thinks is important gets repeated 10 billion times, including his morality message. And it's told to you so often like it's this like epic thing that you should be really impressed by, words of wisdom, that every time I heard it, I was like, that's not that deep. It's not that brilliant. And this whole book seems to be like the message that these characters are dealing with and trying to come to terms with is, it boils down to journey before destination, life before death. Those words get repeated to you over and over and over again, like they are just like the deepest thing ever. And I was like, you could have that in there as like a thing, but the way it's impressed upon you over and over and over that this is what they believe and should believe and are trying to believe, I'm like, I get it. It's just not that big a deal. It's not that mind-blowing. It's really, it seems like something that would be the moral of VeggieTales. Like, we're on that level, but we had 1,000 pages to tell it to us. I didn't need all those pages, and I didn't need the characters wrestling with that idea for that many pages, that explicitly. And then so the way the magic system works, it once again has extremely like religious vibes. They refer to like the Almighty and God, and there's very like monastic lifestyles for the people who like are believers, and it's again, once again, it plays a huge role in how people are acting, and that the old ways are better, and that like they literally, I'm pretty sure there's, if they don't call it parables, there's something very similar to parables that's referred to as a thing that they should learn from. And I was like, this is so religious again. Who told me that this wouldn't be? Who told me that, yeah, Mistborn is, but Stormlight Archive isn't? It is, it most definitely is. And it was just added to my annoyance. Like, it wasn't like it was all super great and then it also was preachy. It just was one more thing that was like, ugh, and then this again. Oh, and then kind of going along with like the lack of coarse language and just being dumb and the tone. So instead of, there is no actual coarse language in the story. Maybe there's like one use of the word shit or something, but I don't think so. But because this is the Stormlight Archive, then like a bajillion words get the word storm attached to them to make it part of the world. So they constantly talk about, you know, the Storm Father, and the way that you or I would be like, you know, oh dear God, they're like, you know, oh, Storm Father, which, okay, that's cute. But then that's what they use everything all the time. All the time. So instead of saying this fucking guy, they say this storming guy. Or instead of saying fuck it, they say storm it. And it's just constantly there. To the point where I'm like, that's not keeping me in the world, it's dumb. It's really, really dumb. Like, I am all for inventing your own slang, your own curse words, but we don't use the same word all the time for everything. We really don't. Like, come up with a few others. If you don't want to use actual, like, coarse language, if you don't want to use actual profanity, then you need to come up with a few more things for these people to be saying, because constantly, every adjective and every noun already has the word storm attached to it, because we're talking about Stormlight and the Storm Father and the high storms, and it comes up a lot. A lot of things have storm attached to them. And then in addition to hearing storm all the time when it comes to elements of the world, everyone's constantly throwing that word around as slang or as profanity. Like, it's so much. Like, I get it. This is the Stormlight Archive. I get it. You do not need to put that in there that much. It's just dumb. I mean, we've got the storming anticipations, friend, that are coming in and ruining everything. Just, it's so childish. It really, really is. So, in addition to being bored with how long it takes me to tell me about these people's situation, it's also told in an extremely childish way. So, I am not sensing the gravity here. I'm not really getting a sense for the stakes. I don't care. Okay. And the last section before we get into miscellaneous nonsense is characters. So I have already kind of alluded to the characters who are our main characters. Caledon, who is storm-blessed. There we go again. One more storm. He's our long-suffering hero. Then we have Shallan, who... oh god, is she annoying. Then we have Dalinar, who I have not talked about that much, but there's definitely some nonsense there that I can't wait to tell you about because it's absurd. And then we have our interludes with the randos, who I'm failing to understand context for. And for that book, yeah, those are pretty much our main characters. Dalinar, Shallan, and Caledon, and friends. Those interludes are about the randos. So Caledon, who I've spent the most time already talking about, we do spend the most pages with, which is kind of why I was talking about him most. Because even though we have all three of these characters, we have such extensive periods of Caledon being in the war camps and Caledon flashbacks that it's definitely the Caledon show. We also have a lot of time with Dalinar, which is boring as shit. Dalinar being, he's the king's uncle. And he's all obsessed with the old ways, and everyone thinks that he's all stuffy and preachy, which he is. And his sons are worried about his mental health because he's into the same old ideas that his brother was into before he died. And then Shallan, who is a massive idiot. She's, oh god, I cannot. So Shallan, where do I even begin? Okay, so she is presented to the reader, like the author's tone on her is that we're supposed to think that she's maybe a little naive, maybe a little bit innocent, but brilliant. That she's like super smart, freaking prodigy. She does not come across that way. She comes across as a fucking idiot. Her master plan, you find out pretty early on, their family is like falling on hard times because their dad was using illegally this like device. Oh, I forgot to include this in the world building section. Okay, well, we'll talk about it now because it's involved with Shallan. So there's these things called soul casters, which are these like magical stormlight gem thingies that allow you to basically transform anything into another thing. So they can take rocks and turn them into fire. You could take a sock and turn it into a loaf of bread. Like pretty much no limitations. A soul caster can soul cast something into another thing. So Shallan's dad was using a soul caster like on the DL to make like to create like ore deposits on his land so that he could be richer and like pay his debts that way. And he's dead now, and the soul caster is broken, and no one knows dad is dead, and everyone is ready to call in their debts. So she tells her brothers that she's gonna go and try to become the ward of the king's sister, because the king's sister has a soul caster. Then she'll get close enough to steal the soul caster and replace it with their broken one, and then come back so that they can kind of fake it again just long enough to pay off the debts and then get rid of the thing. That's the master plan. Now, if you, like me, are thinking, wouldn't becoming the king's ward be kind of the solution in and of itself? Like, that seems like a really, really lofty goal. And if you've achieved that, then you are pretty much set up. And why don't you leverage that position to maybe marry well, get money, get support? Like, that would be the solution. Why are you aiming so high to achieve something so petty? So that's the plan, and she travels a long way to become the ward of the king's sister, who is a heretic because she doesn't believe in the faith of this world, which is why Shallan thought it'd be, no one's going to want to be the ward of the king's sister because she's a heretic. Turns out a lot of people do. But our little special Shallan is just so brilliant and so bright that the king's sister is impressed enough with her to take her on as a ward. So that in and of itself is like a pretty goddamn huge achievement. But of course Shallan is sitting there going like, damn, like I kind of like being her ward, but I'm just here to steal that thing and then go home. Like, how is that your plan? How is that the solution? That's so dumb. Like, it's like if your plan to solve your problems was to start dating the prince just so you could steal like his cufflinks because they're super expensive. And then you're going to pawn those and then pay your debts and go back to your life. Like, wouldn't dating the prince be the solution? You know, just spitballing here. But, so that's her plan. And soul casters, can we just take a moment from the character section and briefly go back to world building? If you have a thing like a soul caster in this world, and there's more than one, they constantly reference the fact that there are multiple soul casters. In fact, this is how they're able to wage war without having huge supply trains, because there are people with soul casters who are creating supplies and food for the army. Please explain how the fuck this economy works to me if you have a device that is not uncommon that can make anything out of anything. Like, there's a huge amount of like hard labor that it seems that this economy is built on, and I don't understand why it's necessary when you have something like a soul caster. You have written a huge loophole in that. This magical, wonderful, can make anything out of anything thing. What has any value anymore? It can make anything. It's not like, they make it sound quite simple to do, and there's no cost to it. It's not like it like is slowly killing the person doing it or something. People do it all the time. The army is literally been at war for 5 years and able to do this away from home without supply trains because there's people soul casting things. What has any value at that point? What is tradable? What is rare? What is the basis of your economy when you can make anything out of anything if you've got a fucking soulcaster? Like, I don't understand how this is meant to fit into this world and make any kind of sense. So that was just brief world building again. Back to Shallan's dumb as fuck plan. So she's presented to us as being this like brilliant person, but her conversations are very inane, and she comes off as really petulant and silly, and it's so cringy. Like all these moments of like her coming up with these clever quips, and it's not just that I think we're meant to think that this is clever. Other characters tell her like, oh well, that was very witty, and like, oh, your wit, you gotta watch that because even though you are so terribly witty, that could get you into trouble. And every time I was just like, that's not witty. That's not clever. It's not brilliant. It's dumb. And So yeah, she's painful to read about. And again, just like with Caledon, where we just spend so long with him in the war camp and his backstory, with Shallan, okay, the setup that I just told you about, so she's now going to be hanging out with this king's sister, learning about philosophy and history and all that kind of thing. She's studying and having all these like witty conversations with the king's sister, which just takes so long. And it doesn't move the plot forward except for her to sit there hemming and hawing and being like, oh man, how am I going to get the soulcaster? And I feel bad about trying to steal it because she's being real nice to me, but that's what I'm here to do. That's my dumbass plan, and I'm sticking with it. So it's just pages and pages and pages of just like random banter between her and the king's sister, and also an Ardent who's like kind of flirting with her, which is extremely cringy to read about as well because the flirting is VeggieTales level too. And it's just, nothing is happening. It's just constantly reading about this character that I'm meant to think is super clever and is not doing pretty much fuck all. So, huge amount of pages that did not need to be there. And then Dalinar, who is the long-suffering king's uncle, who is constantly waging this internal war of morality and wondering what to do. And him debating this with himself, and him wondering how to make any changes in the war and the people that his nephew is ruling, again, is so long and doesn't go anywhere. And you're like, I get it. You're not telling me anything new. I get where his head is at. I get his emotional state. Can we move this along? But we don't. We get told about it at length. And then Caledon himself, who I've complained about how much time we spend with him, he is written, the way he comes across to me is like, he's like a 40-year-old Mary Sue who's having a midlife crisis. He is just the most magical and most special and the best at everything. The most self-sacrificing leader of men who worries about men and them needing to be led, and he should be leading them because he's a leader, and have I mentioned he's a leader of men. It's very subtle. You have to pay a lot of attention to pick up on that. And he's 18, I think. Or close, around about there. He's a teenager for sure. Maybe 19. Like, he does not read like that. I'm sorry. I know that adversity does mature you. Not like this. He reads like an old man. Like a super depressed, downtrodden old man. You can write downtrodden and not have it come across as being a 40-year-old man. Shallan reads like a 5-year-old, and I'm meant to think she's clever. And Caledon reads like a 40-year-old, and I'm meant to think that he's this youthful dude who's just such an amazing leader and just the special who's good at everything and is only sad about his life because he failed to lead other people sufficiently. If he can't save other people, what's the point? Such a saintly soul. Very relatable. And so between Shallan, who's a moron, Dalinar, who's this just old dude with all these moral dilemmas that are extremely simplistic, honestly, which is where we get a lot of the life before death, journey before destination. You're like, yeah, I get it. And Caledon, who's just having his midlife crisis for thousands of pages. There's no one who's sympathetic here. They're all written fairly two-dimensionally, and they're not believable as what they're meant to be. And it's bad. It's just bad. And we're constantly told what they're thinking and feeling. Whenever they're triggered by something, we get told about it, and they realize that that's what's happening to them. And I'm sorry, nobody's that self-aware. Not all the time. And then in addition to them being self-aware about what's triggering them, in Caledon's case, we get extensive flashbacks to establish that that's definitely what he's being triggered by. as a reader, I enjoy getting to know the characters and assessing their actions for myself. If you tell me that a certain thing happened to them, and then you show me that they're reacting to something badly, I can infer that they're triggered by this because of what happened before. You don't have to tell it to me that explicitly over and over and over again, and then have the character tell me that they've come to the conclusion that that's why they're reacting this way to the thing, because it takes the joy out of reading. It's just literally, why? You're just spoon-feeding everything to me. Why am I even here? Last but not least is my favorite section, wherein I just tell you about stuff that made me laugh out loud or cringe or literally go, why? Out loud. So, are you ready? In no particular order. This is just the order that I wrote them down in. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 things to tell you about that made me groan or laugh. Okay, so the first one is pretty early on in the book, and I like literally stopped to write it down because I was just like, ugh. So Caledon, who I've mentioned, is in an army camp in a bridge crew. So they're about to go into battle, like it's go time. And they're, like, all of the bridge crew is cannon fodder, whether you're in the front or in the back, you're kind of all cannon fodder. But he's the leader of men, did I mention that? And he's trying to decide if he should do the leader thing of going to the front of the bridge instead of staying in the back of the bridge, where it is marginally safer. Like, being in the front is just, like, your straight-up death wish, and being in the back of the bridge crew is, like, you're probably gonna die. Not definitely. So he's like, if I'm gonna be a leader, because I worry about that, about being a leader, should I go to the front? And lead. And in the middle of this go time battle decision, we are treated to this metaphor, if you will. Caledon was like a moldy piece of bread on a starving man's plate. Not his first bite, but doomed all the same. I was like, are you serious right now? That's what we went with in the middle of this battle? Like, that did not help to illustrate the point. I get it. Like, they're all like in dire straits and he's probably gonna die. This moldy bread metaphor? Could have done without that. That made me laugh. It did not heighten my sense of, like, danger here. It was laughable. Then, this is one of my all-time favorites. This chapter is literally named after this witticism. So Sanderson was real proud of this one. I don't know why, but he definitely wanted you to not miss his brilliance on this. Because again, the chapter is named after this. Shallan is talking to the king's sister about what she's been reading lately, the philosophers or whatever that she's been studying. And, she's like, come on, Shallan, tell me your thoughts and tell me what you think about what they've been writing. And Shallan's saying about how, they come off as so arrogant and how that can lead to making mistakes and to being overconfident and it's hubris and all this sort of thing. And so Shallan just comes up with the most brilliant play on words, which is the name of the chapter, did I mention. She says that it shouldn't be called arrogance, it should be called errorgance, as in E-R-R-O-R, like as in making mistakes, errorgance. And Shallan says this multiple times and we get, oh, how witty. And it's the fucking name of the chapter. I was like, if that was in there at all, I would cringe. And you were clearly so proud of this that you wanted to make sure that I did not miss that you came up with that little gem. And I was like, this is our brilliant prodigy of a witty main character. Then another of Shallan's witticisms, which we get early on, she's, in order to impress the king's sister, who she wants to be the ward of, she's gonna go, like, cram a bunch of reading. So she goes to a bookstore to get a bunch of books that are, like, books that the king's sister thinks are good ones. So she goes to the bookshop, which the man who runs the bookshop, who cannot read, is offering her all kinds of texts that are like, wouldn't you like to read a romance? Or wouldn't you like to read this? And she's like, no, she actually wants to read, like, serious stuff. Oh my god, how can he do this? Like, oh my god, men, am I right? And he's like, oh, like, those are some pretty heavy texts, which, like, I'm kind of confused about because dudes don't read at all. So who are those texts for? If you're surprised that a woman wants to read them, but men don't read at all, who are they for? Anyway, that's an aside. So when he tells her that, he can tell that she's got discerning taste, and she banters with him, which basically boils down to her saying, oh, I've never eaten a book. Get it? Because, he said taste, and she's talking about eating books. How fucking witty is that? It's not. Oh god, that was cringy. And her like internal monologue is like, oh, my wit has run away with me again. It's gonna get me into trouble. And I'm just like, that's not wit. That's like what a 5-year-old would say. Next up, I have just generally irritation with Brandon Sanderson explaining something in amount of detail that I did not need. Dalinar, who is the king's uncle, who is all about these old morals, decides that he's gonna go help his men dig a latrine, because he would never ask his men to do something that he would not do himself, which is commendable. And simply telling me that you're gonna go dig the latrine, that's really all I need to know. Like, I get it, it's rough work and it's gross, and you're doing it because you believe that, you know, there's no task that's beneath you. Great, I get it. You're a super moral dude. That's not enough, though. Brandon Sanderson spends an extensive amount of, like, page space telling you about how latrines work in this world, because he's just so proud of himself for having come up with his own system for how latrines work in his work camp. So we get treated to an in-depth encyclopedia explanation of how latrines work in this world. And I don't understand why that was necessary. I don't understand why my time was wasted. Like, at the back of my mind, I was like, the only reason for this in-depth explanation of latrines being in here is if at some point the enemy is going to exploit a weakness in the latrine system and use it to their advantage to gain, to defeat them in battle. So I kind of figured that wouldn't happen, and it didn't. But that's the only reason to include that level of detail for a latrine. If you really think that it's so clever that you came up with your own latrine, then you need to publish an appendix, a world of a Silmarillion-style book where you tell us all these gems. But in the main narrative of this plot, I did not need to know about how you built your latrines in this world. I didn't. While he's building said latrine, his dead brother's wife, who he has the hots for, which is very explicit, and she definitely has the hots for him. There is no doubt about this whatsoever. But regardless, there's a lengthy will they or won't they throughout the book, which there's no tension for because they're both into each other and there's nothing standing in their way because their spouses are dead. But whatever. She comes over while he's digging a latrine and is like, why are you digging a latrine? And he's like, oh shit, I was supposed to meet with you. Oh, I feel so guilty about that now. Another thing for me to feel so bad about. And she's like, but why though? Like, why are you digging a latrine? That seems like a thing that's not your job. And he is all about I would never ask my men to do something that I wouldn't do for myself. And she's like, oh, you're an odd man or something, that you're very strange. And he's like, yeah, that's why you would never like me, because I'm so strange. And I'm just like, uh-huh. And she's like, oh, don't you see? That's what makes you so intriguing to me, the fact that you are so different, because people totally come out and say stuff like that. And he's like, well, I don't do it to be intriguing. And she's like, but if you did it to be intriguing, then it wouldn't be interesting. It would ruin it. So the fact that that's just how you are is so much more appealing to me. And I was like, who comes out and says this? And where are the, like, obvious spren, and the I'm into you spren, and the love spren, and the intrigued spren? Like, no one comes out and actually says their own feelings and motivations, especially when it comes to, like, a romantic situation like that. I'm sorry, but they don't. It's so cringeworthy to read. Especially after I was treated to a lengthy explanation of the latrine system. Just that whole scene, I was like, why is this happening? Why? But don't worry, these two, they do get it on later, and there are, I shit you not, passion spren. So, yeah. It got spicy. Then there's another, this kind of ties into, like, the level of banter for Caledon's crew. These are rough dudes, right? They are enslaved, they're cannon fodder, they're ready to die, there's no point in living. And he's trying to get them to, like, kind of, like, banter and have camaraderie, because give them a reason to live. So one of the dudes is from, like, this definitely other culture, possibly other species. And he kind of has an accent and talks weird, which is kind of borderline racist, but it's fine. And then one of the other, they're kind of starting to banter and kind of talk to each other. And this other guy on the crew is within this world, some, like, basically kind of racist joke that everyone is familiar with. Kind of like if, like, you were to say, you're being gypped. Like, it's a common phrase, but is actually offensive to Romani people. So he uses a phrase like that, which would be familiar to people in this world. But the butt of that phrase is that this guy's culture, and his people, they're basically saying that their feet smell is the point of that phrase. And he's like, ooh, oh, actually, oh, that's awkward that he just used that phrase because that guy is from this people. And I was like, and everyone's just like, oh no, this is like, oh, you said that. And he's like, it's fine. And I was like, are you serious right now? These people are like ready any day now, they're gonna die because that's what they are. They're cannon fodder. They're slaves. But the level of banter we're at is, oh, you say his feet smell. Uh-oh, oh no, that's bad. Oh, it's okay. I was like, is this VeggieTales? Like, I am not believing that these are rough around the edges people. Really? Stinky feet? Stinky feet. That's what we're going with right now. Then there's a character who is basically like a jester to the king. And his name is Wit. Yep. His name is Wit. So he is meant to be witty. And so everything he says is really annoying and not witty. But one of my favorites, which was again like definitely pointed out to us very explicitly, like, oh, did you get it? Did you get it? Did you get my joke? Which is when this other guy is making insults as well. And Wit has this clever gem to offer that this guy is not as good at insults as he is at being in sluts. So he took the word insult and rearranged the letters. So clever. Wordplay. I was like, really? If you're gonna name a character Wit, you gotta come up with some clever stuff. Because I'm sorry, he not living up to it. And the way this is written, I'm meant to think he is. I'm meant to find everything he says to just be so goddamn witty. And it's not. It's really not. So don't do it. He is borderline wittier than Shalon, but that's a low bar. Considering my issues with Brandon Sanderson's preachiness and how explicitly he's constantly telling you what you're supposed to be taking away from everything and what everything means and what the point of everything is, just constantly telling you explicitly what it is, what the deal is, what you're meant to be getting out of this. There's a moment where Wit tells a story to one of our characters, I think it was to Caledon, and Caledon is like, well, is this the lesson of the story, or like, what's the point of it, or something? And Wit comes out and says that good storytellers don't tell you what to think. They just pose questions for you to begin to think. And I was like, so by Sanderson's own definition, he's not a good storyteller. Because he's constantly telling us what to think, instead of just posing things for us to think about. So, honestly, as soon as Wit said that, I was just like, oh no, sir. Fuck you. By your own definition, you suck. So, yeah, I think I'm finally done. I have many more examples, honestly. Like, I'm serious, this is the Reader's Digest. I have been ranting for days about all of the things that I find cringeworthy in this book, all the things that don't make sense, and all the reasons why, objectively speaking, I don't understand why this book is so popular. Like, the only thing I can think of is that this like an Emperor's Clothes type situation, where people who don't love it think, well, there must be something wrong with me then, because everyone thinks this is great. So I'm just gonna go with consensus and say this is 5 stars, because I don't want to admit to anyone that I didn't get it. Well, I don't get it. And I give it 1 star. Because I think this is a terrible, terrible book. And it is such a waste of time. And it is so indulgent. Like, to write this many pages and expect your readers to read them all. It's like making your readers read every single note that you ever made when you were wondering about how to build your world. You need to cut this down. It's not good writing because it's long. He seems to have conflated epic and long. You need to warrant this page count. You can have 1,000 pages and it can be fantastic and I will love it. But you need to actually justify the 1,000 pages. He has announced this is going to be a 10-book series. How do you know it's going to be a 10-book series? I'm sorry. The only reason you know it's going to be a 10-book series is because you're committed to enough filler to justify a 10-book deal with your publisher. You might know that it's going to be a long story, but he's clearly just putting everything he's ever thought of in there so that he can make sure that he reaches 10 books, 1,000 pages each. Which I'm used and abused. That's just rude to your readers. Apparently it's working though, because everyone seems to love it. So more power to you, I guess. People are reading them, and they're saying that they're loving them. So I, for one, do not, and I do not get it, and I will not be reading the rest of the Stormlight Archive, because yikes. Major yikes. Let me know in the comments down below why you love this book, because I'm assuming that 80% of people who are watching this are people that do like the Stormlight Archive, because it looks to me like 99% of people who read it like it, because it has an aggregate rating of like 4.8 or something absurd on Goodreads, which means most people that read it rated it out of 5. I don't know what book they were reading, because that does not warrant that. But feel free to let me know in the comments down below why it's super great, why I've totally missed it, why it's the greatest thing ever, and why I'm all wrong. Let me know. Let me know anything and everything, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.